Welcome back, fellow adventurers, to another episode of the Corner of Story and Game. Today we're embarking on a journey through the vast realms of science fiction storytelling and video game narratives with the extraordinary Justin Sloan. A seasoned creative with a passion for all things sci-fi and fantasy, Justin's illustrious career spans over a decade, leaving an indelible mark on both the literary and gaming landscapes. So join us as we delve into the fascinating intersection of sci-fi novels and video game narratives. Justin, thank you for joining me.
Hello, glad to be here.
I have been desperately trying to track you down to chat with you because I want to pick your brain about some science fiction and how it interrelates between writing novels and writing narrative for video games, because you have your toe in both worlds, and that's really cool.
Yeah, I try to enjoy myself, and this has led to a really fun career so far.
Right on. Well, before we dig into that particular topic, I like to have a grounding of just, who you are, where you came from. So can you share how you fell in love with writing and games and the journey from, little Justin to today?
Sure. Yeah, I like to tell a couple of full circle stories that some people might have heard before if they've listened to me talk about this game industry, which is one, when I was 11 or 12, I did this fun thing where I was trying to write comics, and me and my buddy were like, let's make a game out of it. So we picked a soundtrack, and we drew up all these maps on those big old school graphing paper, because this was in the early 90s or late 80s, somewhere in that realm. And then we went and did the whole maps thing. We drew up the story, we do character sheets, we did all this stuff as little 11 or 12-year-olds. And then we started going, okay, what's next? So we took our Super Nintendo cartridges and turned them over and looked up phone numbers and called and said, hey, we have a video game we're trying to sell you. And it was a lot of fun. And of course, they laughed at us and said no. We also did a fighter one too, by the way. We tried to do a fighter one. We drew up all the characters for the fighting, and they're like, what their techniques would be. I'm sure it wasn't as in-depth as my mind thinks it is. But at the time, I thought it was amazing. And so I love to look back at that moment and look a few years later, many years later, when I was at the Federal Reserve Bank doing Taiwan, India, and Japan banking analysis. And I was like, oh my God, this is driving me crazy. And I managed to jump out of there and go work at Telltale Games as a writer. But yeah, the journey that took me there was 5 or 6 years before getting that job at the Federal Reserve Bank. I was in DC, and I was sitting around waiting for the 5th Game of Thrones book to come out. Now we're waiting for the 6th. And I was like, okay, what if I wrote a novel of my own like this? This is inspiring me. What if I could do the same for somebody else? That'd be amazing. And so I sat down and started trying to write, and I fell in love. I think I had 100,000 words of a novel done real quick. I enrolled for a screenwriting classes because I love movies, probably even more than I love novels. What if I tried that? And I started doing that, and I was having a blast. And so when I was at the Federal Reserve, I had some novels, some screenplays, and some people that I had started networking with at Pixar at the time were all leaving to go over to Telltale. And so I applied and managed to get in. And that kind of ties into that second part, which was the second full circle story, which was that I had started writing because of the Game of Thrones books, right? I was waiting for that 5th one. I was like, oh my God. So when I walk into the doors at Telltale and it was still not released, it wasn't announced yet, posters of Game of Thrones on the walls. And I'm just doing my little schoolboy dance, oh my God, in my head. Mentally, I'm just cool. Oh, wow. Yeah, this is awesome. Yeah.
That's really cool, man. So you've tried a lot of different things then. You did some film, novels, video games. Do you pull from all those different experiences to inform your writing? For sure. And I don't necessarily see myself as just one or the other these days. I see myself as a storyteller. I love characters and emotion and diving in to figure out why the characters are doing what they're doing. I think it's also related to why I traveled the world a lot. I went to Japan, Korea, and Italy, and lived in those places, and then traveled as much as I could. I think it has to do with wanting to just understand more of other people who are different than myself, right? And so all these different stories are different ways to do that. With screenplays, it's much more about that structure and making sure that the dialogue is just on point, versus novels. You're getting into the character's head and you're able to kind of go wherever the hell you want, and people can't critique you because it's my novel. Back off, And then games, it's somebody said, it's getting that racehorse across the track, and you're just trying to figure out any way you can to help get that racehorse across the track, building somebody else's baby. And so I love all these different aspects of storytelling. And recently I updated my LinkedIn to say narrative explorer, because I was I don't know what the hell I am. It's just easier to say that than to list everything. But yeah, I love all of it. I think they all complement each other in great ways. A common example I like to pull on that is, especially at Telltale, where I was training to, learn how to do character choice. So we're looking at the 3 or 4, if you count silent, which we do, different ways that a character can respond. And they're thinking about the different ways that scene can play out.
And if you're thinking about that with your normal writing, that's awesome because you're already thinking like, okay, what are some different versions of this? Okay, oh wait, maybe these first 10 ideas are cliche. What if I go with the 11th one? And maybe you don't need to dive down that far every single time. When you're writing a novel, probably not because it's your whatever you want to do. But that process really helps. And then vice versa. If you're thinking about the novels and the screenplays, I think they all tie into each other because you're thinking of that bigger picture and different ways that the story could be approached and then how you're doing it at that exact moment.
Mm-hmm. So as a general storyteller with your toes in both the video game and the sci-fi novel world, just to kind of set the stage for us, in your opinion, what draws audiences to these immersive storytelling formats?
You mean the ones that are more interactive or the novels or all of it?
Both. Like, what's the difference between what draws an audience to a novel as opposed to what draws them to a narrative video game, and what's the similarities? What's that tying thread there?
Sure, that's a good question. For me, I approach it for like what draws me, which is, as I kind of express the emotion. Mm-hmm. It's looking to understand not only characters, but how characters deal with different situations. So growing up, my brother was actually adopted. His dad and mom, so his dad was my uncle who got killed, and his mom went over to drugs and all that stuff. And I remember watching Land Before Time over and over and over again with him and just seeing like how that helped him get through the grief. Maybe not deal with it, but, like in the moment, feel a little better about life. And then parents divorce and all that stuff. And I'm watching Princess Bride and Braveheart a billion times and just loving it. And then when you're feeling sick, you put on your favorite Lord of the Rings or Back to the Future or something like that. Mm-hmm. And for me, it's like that, like going through the experience, how that helps people escape. But then in the stories themselves too, watching how the characters go through these scenarios and theme. I think, some people are like, whatever. And other people are like, it's all about theme. And I personally am probably more toward the latter. I don't think you always need it. I keep going to the novel side. Occasionally you can just write a fun story and there's probably a theme in there, but you don't worry about it. Yeah. But I think the better stories always do really lean into that as much as possible. Sometimes I think it's too much and you get like a little cliche because you're going so hard on it. Like, okay, you know exactly what's coming next. So I think there's that healthy balance. But I think like looking at that and going, oh, wow, that story really speaks to me on this level that either justifies how I acted or helps me understand the next time I'm dealing with something hard or the next time that somebody next to me is going through something tough, like how to better be there for them. I think this emotional core is what really brings readers to the stories.
Very cool. To drill a little deeper down into our specific topic, what about science fiction novels and games? What draws people to science fiction?
Yeah, well, there's those normal ones, right, where it's like looking at technology and how what kind of impact it has on the world and all that stuff. I think that's awesome, but I also think that sometimes people just want escapism. And as much as I would love to fall into that more literary side of it, where, the classics and how they definitely comment on that, I think there's also a strong place for readers who just want to have escapism in the place of space or some kind of cool sci-fi element with future tech or whatever. And that just makes them feel excited. So there's this weird thing in publishing where, especially on the indie market, a lot of readers, like, they don't care about all the drama and all the crazy literary parts of writing. They just want to fist pump and enjoy themselves. A lot of them are truck drivers, or a lot of them are in hospital beds, and they kind of just want something to take them away from that moment. And for me, especially with space and fantasy and these kind of stories, you can, get out there and do something wild, something that just makes their imagination go, whoa, I'm not driving this truck right now. I'm flying through space and battling aliens and all that fun stuff. But to go back a step, I do kind of tend to write everything in more of a fantasy angle. I was much more raised on fantasy than sci-fi. So like Brandon Sanderson and Jordan and all these authors that I thought were amazing. Those have inspired me a lot more. So I tend to joke, and you probably see by my reviews on Amazon that a lot of my sci-fi books definitely have that fantasy flair to them. And so my book that I'm coming out with pretty soon with Planet Quest is probably the most sci-fi specific book that I've done yet, where I'm not having any kind of fantasy elements in there at all. There was one that I did called Project Destiny that was much more just focused on the tech of it all, and it doesn't quite get into fantasy, but it's like borderline. So I'd say that's like the other one. And with those, yeah, it's a lot of like exploring the tech and just seeing what kind of fun escapism we can get to the audience through those means.
Cool. Speaking of exploring the tech and the elements that make up the world, I'm a huge world building nerd, so I always have to ask, what's your approach to world building whether you're working on a novel or a game or something where you get a chance to get your hands dirty in the actual world building?
Yeah, I love looking at the big picture, but I think I like to work backwards as well. So I like to think, okay, who are the characters that I'm telling the story around? And then what are they going through? And what, if I am exploring a theme and leaning heavily into that, which I usually do nowadays, what kind of big themes am I playing with? And then work backwards from that. So if I'm going to be exploring the world, I like to think, okay, well, what kind of cultures might there be that could best help me explore that character by going to, like, if they're going to go to a futuristic Japan where it's going to be all about this crazy technology, and then they go over to this other place that's a little more Mad Max, like what kind of story is that helping me to tell? But then, yeah, looking at real life, I think is great inspiration, seeing why people are obsessed with, certain types of people are obsessed with going to Tokyo. What is it that drives them there? Is it the total difference in it's just how the people are, the customs and the culture, or is it the fancy technology, all these big screens with neon lights everywhere, like the Cyberpunk 2077? Is it something along those similar lines? And so, like, looking at that, and then also looking at references. So thinking, okay, what has Cyberpunk done? What have all these other games done, and movies and books? And I think that's really important to have that broad depth, playing games, watching movies, reading books, because then you'll know what other people have tried. And so if you are ripping them off, you at least know you are and can change it. Otherwise, a lot of times you see this in the indie publishing market, not to bash on them, sorry, fellow indie authors, but a lot of people would just write stuff and they think, oh, it's so unique, it's so special, like nobody's done it before, but like a billion games have done it before, and they're just not playing enough games to know that. So I think that's a big part of it, is knowing what else is out there, knowing why people are excited about certain things, and being able to then kind of extrapolate and go a little bit further and add some new elements. And then once you start really diving into the characters and how they interact with the world around them, I think that's where the real world building starts, because that's when your creative mind takes over and your analytical mind just shuts up.
Very cool. Is there, in your opinion, I'm curious, is there a major difference when you're world building for science fiction or fantasy as opposed to something like Walking Dead or something more modern? Or
I do think nowadays, especially because I'm more aware of sci-fi and what is expected of the genre, that I do kind of try to approach it in more of like, what are we commenting on here? Mm-hmm. Likewise, tying into the theme, like if we're exploring a world that's more Mad Max, what kind of themes are we playing here versus, the big Federation with its technology and all the fancy things it can do and have, implants into your body and all this stuff. And like, so what kind of commentary are we making here? And I don't lean too hard on that because I don't want to be preachy, but still having that awareness of it. I think that's a big difference. With fantasy, I'm much more of a Game of Thrones fantasy, like the first 1,000 pages of Game of Thrones, book one, where there's no real magic, but there's a lot of talk of magic and hints that there's probably some dragons out there, things. I love that kind of fantasy a lot. Or like leaning into Sanderson's Elantris or Mistborn, where, it's all based on like his, what is it called? The hard magic system. And like getting into the rules of it and making sure that it's specific. Lit RPG is a really fun genre nowadays, especially for the world building, because you're looking at what are the different ways to approach having your character progress or level up, like in a video game. So that's been a lot of fun.
Very cool. I'm curious, do you play tabletop role-playing games? Are you a gamer nerd on the board game and role-playing games?
I wish, not so much anymore. When I was young, I had a lot of fun with a lot of those card games and D&D and whatnot. And we'd go over to my friend's house and his parents would set up the whole table with Warhammer 40K and whatnot. It was awesome. But no, as I got older and had kids and moved away to different countries and lost touch with all my friends, it became harder. It was nice at Telltale because we'd have lunchtime sometimes where this guy Jason would bring in all his different games and we'd have fun playing those. And now with kids, I try to get them into some of these. We had a little story time for a while where I made up just like a story time basic version of D&D, and I'd have their characters like going through these different worlds and leveling up and stuff. And I was just trying to keep track of it on a little piece of paper at night time until we all started nodding off and lose track of it. No, not as much as I would like to be.
I'm always curious because I think that informs a writer and a designer in some way.
I think so for sure. And I think that's why I say I wish I was, because I definitely agree that people who really play D&D all the time or not, I think are way better at this. So if people are out there aspiring writers, get a group, find a group. They have them at a lot of the game stores around town and nothing else. I'm sure there's some fun ways online to connect with each other.
There sure is. Okay, so digging a little deeper into narrative design, I'm curious, when you're writing on a project that is either an established IP or you're writing on something that's across different formats or medium, how do you maintain coherence, consistency? How do you make sure that the story and the theme and the world building are all still consistent across formats?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of documentation for sure. Coming from the military and government and all that, definitely. So one thing I learned in grad school for writing was one of my professors. He got with me and he was like, my first version of my book, and he was like, "Okay, this is cool, but let's throw it all away, and we'll start over with a nice Excel sheet." And I was like, "What? No!" But what he had me do is take the main characters and then put like a tab for each of them, and then do a timeline for like them from when the book starts to where we are to where it ends, but then also a separate timeline from when they were born till the book starts, and then looking at their key moments and then tracking all of those and putting them, how would that affect them, and then how in the story might that play out, key moments, even if it's a small moments, is like a leaf is falling and they see it falling and they think back to some big moment of their life when, I don't know, they watched their brother fall down after tripping and he never got back up, and how it relates to these. So I think that was a really good exercise for me to start thinking, okay, I need to track things and I need to make sure that I know what I've already referenced in a story and whatnot. And then when you're going across different mediums, so like with Planet Quest, this novel series I've been working on, and it was also the narrative lead for a while, which involves the games they're making, but also a comic they're doing and a Discord interactive story that's kind of like, choice-based, telltale-ish. With that, very much, especially with multiple writers, documentation. So we have a whole wiki, a world Bible. We have calls to discuss it. If you're by yourself, I think make sure that you have the wiki is great. If you can get like a buddy to talk through, I think that's amazing. I think that helps a lot. I have on the project the guy that I've known for 20 plus years. And then what we do is we just like once a week, we just get on the phone and we'll do a little friendly chat, but then we're like, all right, here's what I'm working on the story. And we just kind of ping it off each other just to get that. When you talk about it, I think your mind analyzes it differently. So that just helps. You might figure it out just right there. You don't even need the other person to weigh in, or occasionally we'll pause and be like, does that hit anything for you? Are you getting cool ideas based off of what I just said? And we'll have these little spitball sessions, and you can do that with your friends. Usually your spouse is not so keen on that. They'll get bored of it after the second time, but I still try. I never give up. Yeah. But really the quick answer is, of course, documentation and making sure that you're keeping track of when you said what, and if you need to, sometimes it helps to put it in which chapter, or if you're, game and movie, it's different, of course. But especially on the novel front, I found, wait, I said their eyes were blue on chapter 2. I can't say they were green on chapter 20. Those little details.
Yeah. You've got my brain working. We're going to wander off from the science fiction for a second into the craft of writing. You talk about spreadsheet. Is that a process you still do? Like your writing process for your novels, do you still build big spreadsheets and do a lot of planning and plotting?
Not so much. I also think as you get more experienced, you need to do less. So on outlines, I would say, well, my old outlines, be long. Nowadays, I'll do an outline that's maybe high-level beats of like a page or two. When I'm doing it for a project like Planet Quest, what I do is I'll usually do like a paragraph per chapter as well, because people want to know what it's about. They want to have buy-in and be able to look at it and be like, oh, no, let's go a little more X or Y or Z in there. And so not so much. I'm trying to think if I do it all really. I do have an Excel sheet for like those kind of chapter specific things, like especially with that when I'm doing lit RPG or progression fantasy type stuff. Then, level 10 on chapter 5. What are their stats there? What kind of new skills have they done? That's very important for those kind of stories, because I tried to write one without doing that. And it kicked my butt. To give you some background on that, I wrote one of these books really fast, and it was my best-selling book ever. So I always tried to replicate that, but then you realize that when you write real fast, you don't remember any of those details. So that's the downside, is when you try to go write book 2.
Right. So you're very much a planner, not a pantser. You're a plotter.
I think I'm a Gemini, so I have both sides.
There you go. Perfect answer.
Yeah. When I'm working on big projects, I definitely am a planner, and you have to be. There's multiple people on the process, on the game or the screen, not necessarily the screenplay, but the TV show, if you're working in something like that. So you got to make sure everybody's on the same page and aligned. But yeah, on my own, I love to write by the seat of my pants. It's pantser for people who don't know that term. Yeah. But I recognize the value in having something on the page that's, planned and whatnot. So the preference is to just go and do whatever the hell I want. And then the future Justin slaps that present Justin and says, no, gotta plan a little bit.
It's a future Justin problem.
Yeah. That's what I used to like to say. Nowadays, I'm like, okay, I recognize that this is going to be ongoing. I can't just stop or whatever. So I have to be a little smarter.
Right on. So, okay, let's pull back to science fiction for a second, or for a while. We'll see. What role, you mentioned themes. So what role do the themes play in your writing for science fiction, whether it's technology, futurism, commentary on today's society? How much do you lean into themes these days, and which ones are your favorites?
Yeah, I would say that I actually leaned into more of the themes on a personal level. So it's almost like the story in terms of that part doesn't have to be sci-fi. And I find that the elements of sci-fi just help me tell those stories and themes better. So for example, one of my screenplays is about a man who's dealing with grief. A lot of my stories, I've looked at my log lines in my novels and I'm like, oh, so many of them deal with grief or with learning that you're not a monster, like these kind of elements, like getting over your past, basically dealing with your past. And so this one is about a man who lost his wife, and he finds out about a rehab facility that helps you deal with grief by interacting with your lost loved one. So they recreate like a whole virtual reality AR lost loved one, wife in his case. And it gets a little creepy, and he starts wondering if it's really her or if it's like some kind of a demon thing that's crossed over and kind of horrorous. So in that case, it's this like, augmented reality that helps me tell this story versus other times dealing with a military guy in this new Planet Quest book who he tried to go military. His whole team died because of something he did. And so now he's a private investigator off trying to solve mysteries across space. But that all comes back to haunt him over and over again, and so it's all about like the dealing with the grief, but he gets certain enhancements, like this one that's in his wrist that helps him keep track of information and sees like a little hologram version of the intel that he's going after and stuff. But he starts getting a sickness, related to these tech elements. And I think a lot of those can play in different ways, like depending on how you look at it. Like you could just write that and it would just be a story, or you could try to tie the theme in somehow, like where when he's getting sick, it's because he's relying too much on this and he's not really dealing with the issue at hand. And I think it's great to do those in subtle ways, as I kind of already said, like, but if I'm too heavy handed, people are gonna be like, hey, he's too much of a theme guy. I like the story to like propel itself forward without heavily relying on those, but like having them there because it makes the story so much richer.
Do you feel there's themes out there in the literary world and in the game world that have been overdone and need to, take a break for a while?
Oh, good question. No, because I think characters are what makes stories awesome. So character and emotion. And I think as long as it's cool new characters that are dealing with it in fun new ways, I think that's great. I'll throw out there a webtoon that I've loved reading recently, which is more on the superhero side, but it's called Unordinary. And that one's so fun. Like you could look at it and it's kind of like cliche and in some ways and like kind of corny in some ways, but it's just freaking awesome. Like I was reading it to my 6-year-old and we're just having a blast. But the main issue there is similar to my themes. And that's why I probably resonated with it so well. It's about this character who's done bad things in his past and he's looking to move on to be a better person. So he tries to pretend that he doesn't have any superpowers. And then I'll give away some of the, spoiler, blah, blah, blah. He has superpowers, but he's trying to hide them. And when he lets them out, it starts turning him into a monster. So like he has to deal with that. And at one point he's almost like suicidal. And like this woman's yelling at him, trying to break through the superpower barrier that he put up. Like, you are not a monster. And it's this great moment that like, I think over and over that topic has been done, and maybe it could be cliche, but it doesn't matter because the characters are awesome.
Right on. That's a good answer.
Sure. Good answer for me. Better answer for somebody else probably has out there somewhere.
I asked you, so it's a good answer. So yeah, you've touched on this and I think you probably covered this, but just to put a pin into it, how do your personal experiences and your personal interests inform the narratives you're creating, whether it's sci-fi, video games, novels, in general even?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I've watched, like I mentioned to you before the show, I've watched The Lord of the Rings and Star Wars and like 1,000 times and Braveheart. And I think that's a huge part of it is like just how what we've loved influence our stories. Like so often when I'm writing, I'll be like, wait, what if there was James Horner playing here? What if there was a sprawling, vista and you're looking out over, okay, what would be the version of that? And then it just starts flowing, or even subconsciously probably. But then, yeah, of course, like the personal interests, like I lived in Japan for 3 years and other places like I mentioned, and a lot of those play into the stories I'm writing because probably naturally, but also I think it's cool to give other people that hint of excitement that comes with traveling. One reason I started writing to begin with also that I didn't mention was for my brother who passed away, cousin, all that, adopted brother. He wasn't into reading at all. And I was like, well, what if I started writing stories that people like him would be into? And I didn't know there was this audience out there that are truck drivers and who love to read more just like fun stories. All I knew at the time was like literary style writing, like I'd read The Hunchback of Notre Dame and tried to get him into that. And he was like, no, the hell is this? And it makes sense in hindsight for certain types of readers. And so discovering that has been a blast. And I've loved being able to dive into what fascinates not only me, but seeing what people around me might be excited about and trying to inject more of that into the stories.
That's very cool. I think it's important for writers and game writers and narrative designers to remember there are other audiences and we need to step outside of our own biases and recognize who we're writing for on a project. It's like,
yeah,
there is
for sure.
It is for everything.
Yeah. And that ties into like diversity and all that too. Like, I don't know if we're supposed to talk about certain things that I won't mention, but like there's a lot of weirdness going on in the industry of games right now. And, but I went through this program called Respectability a couple summers back, and I thought it was great because it really opens your eyes to how other people perceive if you write, as a bad example, kind of, a veteran deal with PTSD, and that's what turned him evil. Like, that sucks. That's obvious, in my opinion, but it might not be obvious to non-military people because I am around veterans all the time. So many of them are dealing with PTSD, and most of them are more patriotic than ever. It doesn't make them less good. I think the people who go out there and do horrible things were probably horrible to begin with, and maybe they joined the military thinking that they could go do horrible stuff or something. I don't know. Or their brain was already kind of, we will get into that.
I know where you're going.
Yeah, and I think it's important to be able to look at stories and think, how are other people going to interpret this? And if my whole cast is white or male or something like that, is that other reader out there who's reading it going to be able to relate as well? The moment that hit me with this the most was when my daughter was like looking at some cast of superheroes, and she's like, but they're all boys. And I was like, let me open up a whole new world for you. And we busted all the girl ones. So like they had it, and it's great. And there's a diverse cast. And like you look at Star Trek and all these, and I'm going to get now slammed by these people who are going to be mad at me, but I'm just saying, I think there's value in showing people that you care and love about everybody, not just a certain group.
Amen. I don't think those people listen to my podcast because I've slammed them enough times now. They've all gone away. So you're perfectly
Good
fine.
Deal. I'll stand on
the trolls. Yeah.
Soapbox.
Oh, I will lend you my soapbox. Have it.
Awesome. Good.
Okay. Well, we're starting to get close to time here, so we're going to start wandering kind of towards the door-ish. But before we leave the crunchy stuff here, there is a question that I like to talk to narrative designers about because I know it's an old question in the narrative design world, but I like getting fresh takes on it. And that is the balance between player agency, the ability for the player to make lots of choices or feel like they're making lots of choices, and coming up with a story, an ending that feels emotionally resonant at the end of a video game. So that balance between choice and control in order to have a good narrative structure. Where do you fall on that? What's your thoughts on that? How do you do that?
Yeah, I think it's a lot about the staying true to the character and getting that emotional, like if the emotional arc of the character feels solid and that you feel like you had any sort of impact on it. I don't think it needs to be huge, game changing, like the whole game goes in 20 different directions, although those games are fun. I think it's very much about the role playing experience and being like, oh, if I made this small decision here, then that impacted that over there, and you actually see it happen. I think that's all it really needs to be. I think, like, for example, when you're playing first person shooters, if they go off on one direction and then you see that some other people didn't get helped, and because of that, something happens down the road, you're like, ooh, I actually had impact on this story. And that's great. And I think that's like the key there, and the balance is. But of course, like when you're providing 4 choices, all those choices, and this isn't anything new probably to your audience, but yeah, all those choices should be, of course, in line with that character. And hopefully also something that the player is excited about. Because if there's 4 choices that are very true to the character, but the player's like, this is stupid, I don't care right now, they're going to throw their controller down and never play the game again, maybe. For example, there's a game that I won't name, because I'm associated to some other property similar to it right now, where in a certain point in the story, you have to shoot a U.S. Marine. And in that moment, I was like, I'm done. So I just set the controller down and walked away. And then I picked it up a year or 2 later because I was like, I have to finish this for research purposes. But in the moment, I was like, nah, I choose not to do that. And that wasn't a choice, though. In the game, that's just like the one path, and would there be a workaround around in that game? No, but like the Telltale version of that would be pretty interesting, looking at what other options happen, and maybe you lose your whole family because of that, but you at least have the moral code. I love watching The Witcher. I've been watching that lately, and in there he has that thing where he like has to. They say you have to choose this or this, and he's like has a moment where he's like, nope, just not going to do that. If the choice costs you your morals, So I think there's, anyway, going back to your question, like a healthy balance that's all about the character and the emotions. There's words that I throw out over and over again. But yeah, keeping the role playing experience.
Nice. I think you also touched on it when you mentioned losing your whole family. It's important that choices have consequences. Am I right? Like, it's important that regardless of which of the dialogue choices you choose, at some point there's a consequence for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So whether it's role-playing experience that just shows you that something happened, or if there's actual dire consequences, I actually think I wonder if there is a game like this. Tell me if there is. It'd be interesting if like you had a choice-based game like this where everything that happens because of your consequences is just more awesome, you know? So consequences in a good way. I think that'd be an interesting one to play. We're like, oh, you'd be like the One Piece game or something, you know, where like he's always kind of like fist bumping and everything's awesome. And you're like, yeah, I did that thing. And now I'm going to be the Pirate King. And it just gets more and more amazing. But yeah, of course, you know, I wrote on Game of Thrones and such games at Telltale. And I love exploring the different Ramsay Bolton style options as well. Yeah. I think consequences are what really help you feel the weight of your decisions.
I would play that Pump You Up game. That sounds like a blast.
Yeah. Maybe I'll make it someday.
We need some of that positive energy.
They'd be like, you know that guy, Justin, who smiles all the time? He made a new game that's just all about awesomeness. Let's play it. Yeah.
Everybody'd play that, man. That's cool.
Fingers crossed.
I have a question that I ask everybody. It's the question that lives at the heart of this podcast. And that is, in my opinion, there is this magical space at the intersection of story and game. It's where novelists and game writers, comic book writers, improv actors, all these people can meet and hang out and just get along. There's something shared here. In your opinion, if you agree with me, what is it that is shared? What's the magic thread that holds us all together?
Mm-hmm. I've already hit on that, I guess, a couple of times, right? Like my thought is the emotions and the shared character experiences and seeing how that we as a community, as a world, as people finding our groups or tribes or whatever you want to call them, how we work together and how we get over situations and, you know, emotional hardships. I think that's very important. And one reason that like consequences is such a great thing in games is because then you're moving on from that and you're still trying to win and beat the game. So yeah, that a character growth and emotion part of it.
Very cool. All right. Well, we are almost out the door here. I like to do a little quick fire just so people get to know you a little bit more. Just top of your mind, quick answer. What are you currently playing?
Well, I can't stop playing Ghost of Tsushima. I just keep playing it over and over again. Even when I start playing another game, I'll be like, I kind of just feel like playing Ghost of Tsushima again because it's just so meditative. Like you're just sitting there and like the sceneries are grand, the music's awesome. I feel like the combat system is perfect. I don't feel like annoyed at it at any moment. It doesn't feel too easy or too hard. It's just fun. So for me, you know, with my smiley, fun-natured style, yeah, Ghost of Tsushima over and over.
Very cool. What are you currently reading?
What am I reading? It's kind of a downer. That's the opposite of what we were just talking about. And it ties into wanting to make sure that I don't contribute negativity and toxicity to the work environment. I'm reading the book about Harvey Weinstein. I'm listening to the audiobook about it. What's it called? I think Hollywood Endings, maybe, is what it's called. But it's interesting because they also delve into the background of Miramax and different other people who, you know, he interacted with along the way and other film studios. And so kind of understanding Hollywood, understanding how one person could, you know, go down such a dark path. And also, you know, I don't think I'd ever have any kind of worry that I would go on that path, but I do think it's great to like be aware of what people are talking about and the details of it so that you can make sure not to go down that path, but if you see red flags, to figure out how to deal with them as soon as possible.
That's wise. Do you listen to music when you're writing or sound? And if so, what do you like to listen to?
Hell yes, I do. I've actually been enjoying Nate Ruth's Fun a lot lately. That's a band that I like a lot. I think usually though, music that works best for me is like pump you up music. So I have two like main things that I go with. One is like an Epic Samurai with rain on YouTube, put that on the big TV and it's just like pouring rain over a samurai village and you have like some cool like Last Samurai music or something. The other ones are movie soundtracks. And then a certain time of the year, you know, some people hate Christmas music. I am not one of those people. So there's a YouTube playlist called Epic Christmas Music. And it's all like Carol of the Bells, but like intense. And I love that because I'm like, just like, yes, dun, 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 just writing like crazy. So, yeah.
Very cool. Do you find the energy from what you're listening to infuses into your writing?
Oh, yeah. So if I'm feeling anxious, then I'll put on Rachmaninoff or something instead, and that'll kind of cool me down. Or if I'm just feeling like my brain is not awake, I'll sit outside and just turn off all music and just listen to nature or sit in a coffee shop and just enjoy the ambiance. So it very much depends on the mood. I think this is key for a lot of writers, is like figuring out how to trigger your mindset. Like, you're not always in the mindset to write, but we are writers. So we got to sit down and move our fingers on that keyboard. And so being able to figure out, okay, I'm in this mood, so right now I need to do this, to be able to get in that mindset of doing the work. And it doesn't always have to be muse inspired. It can be like, just, okay, my fingers need to be moving. Something needs to make that happen. And sometimes it's taking a walk or a nap as well, of course. And the one reason I've watched The Lord of the Rings so many times is, I'm so used to it. And now it's just like beautiful soundtrack and beautiful scenery. So I'll let it play in the background while I'm writing if I'm in that kind of mood. I'm like, I just need something to kind of distract the voices, cancel out the voices in my head. And then I'll just put on Lord of the Rings. I'm like, oh, yes, in my zone. And I'll just start writing.
Very cool. Okay, last one. If you could host a game session with any 4 people from any time in history, living or dead, what would you play? And this could be board game, video game, tabletop game, whatever, poker even. And who would it be?
Yeah. I mean, I'd probably put like some of my just favorite writers, like Sanderson and Martin and Tolkien. But I'd probably just to hear their thoughts on story as we go through it all. And then I'd add my brother, right? The one I mentioned who passed away recently. We're actually going up to Seattle in a couple of weeks for his memorial. So one reason is we never really played games. He was 8 years younger than me. I went off to the Marines when he was only 10, right? And so having that chance to connect with him on that level would be really cool. I think when he was alive, he never would have wanted to do that. But since we're making a wish list, that'd be awesome.
There you go. All right. Well, I do also like to make a little space here at the end. What are you working on? What do you want to talk about? What should people be checking out? Where can they find your stuff?
Yeah. So I'd love to give a shout out to the Planet Quest novels. The first one's going to be called Quantum Paradox, I believe, unless that changes. And so that's supposed to be coming out probably not too long after this podcast airs. This image here is one of many that one of the artists has just been putting together to give like kind of an idea of what's going on in certain scenes. So they're not like the cover art, but fun additional art. And the cover artist for the books and somebody who's been working a lot in this has been a guy named John. He's awesome. He was heavily involved in the art for Rogue One. And it's been fun because working with him and then listening to podcasts like on the Directors Guild, and they'll throw out his name and I'm like, oh, that's the guy who's doing my book cover, and working with me a lot on this on the other side. So yeah, the Planet Quest books are coming out. They're epic and a lot of fun. It's a trilogy. Book one's like 160,000 words, which is pretty long. I don't know what that is, 500 or 600 pages probably. And they're all done, ready to go. I'm also working on a series with a Disney guy who lives where I do, nearby. We met each other because we live in the area, but then we were like, let's write some books together. So we wrote one and now we're doing a trilogy, and that's going to be a lot of fun. I'm trying to do more of like a franchise out of that one where we're going to come up with this whole like transmedia and experience of it, hopefully. So that one I will not name yet. I'll just say stay tuned so people can have a little mystery and be excited. And in the meantime, the Planet Quest novels will be launching soon.
Fantastic. If people want to track that down or track you down, where's the best place to find you online?
Yeah, I think easy is Justin Sloan author at gmail.com. If they want us to say hi or whatever, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm pretty open to chatting on there. I used to be a lot better about responding. I still think I do a good job, but if I don't, it's not because I'm trying to be a jerk. It's just because I lose track. So I will say, always feel free to double ping me. And if on a triple or fourth time I haven't responded, then I'm probably just being a jerk. But I was trying not to. Yeah.
All right, man. Well, it is time to close up shop, put down the fire, put up the chairs. So before we wander out the door, I would love to give you the last word. Do you have any parting words of wisdom?
Well, I think for all aspiring writers out there, there's a lot of this negativity with layoffs and all that in the game industry, especially. And yeah, that sucks. And there's this weird debate, like, should we advise people to pursue this dream and all that? And I'll just weigh in on that. And I'll say, yeah, pursue the dream, have fun. Who cares? But be smart, like make sure you have a way to pay rent. And so I worked in the military and the government and Federal Reserve Bank before I jumped into games, and even between game jobs, because there's not always something at any given minute. And if, you're not rich, that's tough. So I wrote novels while I was at Telltale in the evenings or weekends, whatever, so that when I left, I'd have some stuff to start publishing. And I did, and they took off, and it was awesome. And I was able to just be an author for a couple of years and then do little game jobs when I felt like it. And that's lucky. I know that. But, having other things you can do that revolves around your passion, your skill set is very smart. Screenplays, I do those as well for fun. I did like one TV show for Roku. It was a great experience. Might do more in the future, depending on what's going on with the game industry. But right now I'm set. So that's awesome. But I'll just say, yeah, keep pursuing the dream. try to make sure that what you're doing all tells a story of who you are and why you're the right person for that job in that one place, and reach out to people like me on LinkedIn and others and say, hey, I'd love to hear your thoughts or advice. Try not to expect that we can, always hop on the phone, but at least like a little email back and forth. And then maybe if we were able to, a lot of people are really nice, and they were nice to me when I was starting off. And I think a lot of people out there are still great in this industry and are willing to give their thoughts and advice and be encouraging.
Well, folks, the path less taken is calling, so it's time to close up shop and head out. First of all, thank you to Justin for a captivating exploration of the intersection between science fiction novels and video game narratives. Justin, your wealth of knowledge and your passion for storytelling shines brightly through every word, offering invaluable insights for creators and enthusiasts alike. So thank you. And to you, dear listener, as always, thank you for taking your spot at the table. May you continue exploring, creating, and sharing your stories with the world. Stay safe, Wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop in the corner of story and game.